Get back. This is a police line. The words were a shove, delivered with the flat, impersonal authority of a man who saw a threat, not a person. He had no idea he was yelling at the one man in the entire city who could stop the clock. But then, all Officer Davies saw was a black man in a gray hoodie, and in his world, that was a problem looking for a place to happen. The city held its breath. It was a cold, wet Tuesday in November, the kind of night where the air itself feels heavy with bad news. Flashing lights painted the slick pavement in frantic strokes of red and blue, a chaotic watercolor of impending disaster. A 3-block radius had been evacuated. A sea of uniformed officers, yellow tape, and nervous energy held back a growing crowd of onlookers, their faces pale and upturned in the strobing lights. In the center of it all, inside the lobby of the First National Bank building, sat a package. It wasn't ticking, but no one needed to hear a sound to know what it was. The threat had been called in 40 minutes ago, specific, credible, and detailed enough to make the blood of hardened veterans run cold. They were waiting for the expert, the bomb squad, the technician, the man they called the surgeon. Lieutenant Marcus Cole walked toward the yellow tape, his hands tucked into the pockets of his hoodie. He moved with a calm, deliberate stride that seemed out of place in the frantic energy of the scene. His mind was already inside the building, deconstructing the threat, running through schematics, visualizing the device described in the initial report. He wasn't thinking about the cold or the crowd or the uniform blocking his path. He was already at work. "Hey, you hear me?" Officer Davies stepped forward, planting his feet like a bulldog. He was young, his face tight with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. He held a thick arm out, barring Marcus's way. "This area is on lockdown. Get behind the line." Marcus stopped a foot from the tape. His eyes, calm and incredibly focused, scanned past the officer, taking in the positioning of the command post, the staging area for the fire department, the angle of the buildings. "I need to get through," he said, his voice a low, steady baritone that carried no hint of alarm. Davies scoffed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. "Yeah, you and everybody else, pal, now back up before I make you." He gave Marcus a hard shove on the shoulder. It wasn't just a push to move him back, it was a push to put him in his place. Marcus didn't stumble. He absorbed the force, his body as steady as a rock. He looked at the officer, really looked at him for the first time. He saw the fear masquerading as aggression. He saw the prejudice, reflexive and unthinking. He'd seen it 1,000 times before in places far more dangerous than this. "You don't want to do that," Marcus said, his voice still quiet, but now edged with something cold and hard as steel. "Is that a threat?" Davies' hand drifted instinctively toward his sidearm. His partner, an older, wearier cop named Henderson, shifted his weight uneasily. "It's a fact," Marcus replied. "You're wasting time. Every second you keep me standing out here, the risk gets higher for everyone, including you." From a nearby patrol car, a radio crackled, the dispatcher's voice tinny and strained. "Command post to all units. What's the ETA on EOD? The clock is running, people." Davies' jaw tightened. He looked at Marcus, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. The hoodie, the calm demeanor, the quiet insistence. To a man conditioned to see threats everywhere, Marcus fit a profile. "Who are you?" Davies demanded. "I'm the technician you're waiting for." Davies stared at him for a beat, then threw his head back and laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound. "Right, You're the bomb expert, and I'm the mayor of New York City. Get out of here. He turned to Henderson. Get this guy out of here. Take him in if you have to. We don't have time for this. Henderson hesitated. There was something in the man's eyes, a stillness that didn't quite fit the picture of a troublemaker. Let's just calm down, son, he said, his voice a low rumble. But Marcus wasn't talking to Henderson. He was talking to Davies. You need to check your radio. You need to ask your captain who you're waiting for. You need to do it now. I don't need to do a damn thing you say, Davies spat, his face inches from Marcus's. Marcus sighed, a slow, weary exhalation. This was the part he hated. The dance. The pointless assertion of dominance from a man who had no idea how out of his depth he was. He slowly reached inside his hoodie and Davies immediately tensed, his hand clamping down on his weapon. Easy, Marcus said, his voice flat. He pulled out a worn leather wallet and flipped it open, revealing the polished gold badge and federal ID of the city's explosive ordnance disposal unit. Lieutenant Marcus Cole, lead technician. Davies squinted at the ID, his mind refusing to connect the dots. The picture matched the man, the credentials looked real, but the image clashed violently with the story he had already written. Bomb experts were supposed to look like they did in the movies, older, white, with crew cuts and stern faces. They weren't supposed to look like this, like a kid from the neighborhood. That's a fake, Davies said, the accusation automatic. He snatched the wallet, his thumb smudging the plastic over Marcus's photo. A damn good one, I'll give you that. Where'd you get it? Give me back my identification, officer, Marcus said, his voice losing its last shred of patience. It was now cold, clipped, and commanding. The voice of a man used to being obeyed in situations where a single mistake meant death. The shift in tone made Henderson take a half step back. It was a voice that carried an authority that had nothing to do with a uniform. But Davies was too far gone, lost in his own narrative of confrontation. You're obstructing a police investigation, and you're carrying a forged federal ID. That's a felony, Davies said, a thrill of victory in his voice. He had him now. He'd found the crime. You're under arrest. He reached for his cuffs, but he never got to use them. A new voice cut through the air, sharp and furious as a whip crack. Davies, what in the goddamn hell do you think you're doing? Captain Eva Rostova came storming through the police line like a tempest. She was a stern, no-nonsense woman with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun and a gaze that could peel paint. She was the incident commander, and the vein pulsing in her temple made it clear she was seconds from exploding. She had been screaming into her radio for an update on her EOD tech, only to be told he wasn't on scene yet. Now she saw him, held at bay by one of her own patrolmen. Davies froze, his hand hovering over his cuffs. He turned, his face paling. Captain, this man, he was trying to cross the line. He has a fake ID. Rostova didn't even glance at the wallet. Her eyes were locked on Marcus, a look of profound relief and incandescent rage warring on her face. Lieutenant Cole, she said, her voice tight with stress. My apologies, we've been waiting for you. Davis's world tilted on its axis. Lieutenant Cole. He looked from his captain's furious face to Marcus's calm, unreadable one. The name echoed in his head, the surgeon. He felt the blood drain from his face. Rostova turned her full, wrathful attention to him. Her voice dropped to a low, lethal hiss that was more terrifying than any shout. You had my lead technician, the only man on this coast I trust to handle a device of this complexity. standing out here for 10 minutes while you played tough guy." She snatched the wallet from Davis's hand and shoved it back at Marcus. "Did you push him?" Davies opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "He asked a question, officer," Marcus said quietly, his eyes never leaving Davis's face. Rostova took a step closer to her subordinate, her presence suffocating. "I heard your transmission, Davies. Looks like a stray." "Is that what you said? Is that how you describe a member of this department? A lieutenant?" She pointed a trembling finger at the bank. "There is a bomb in that building that is sophisticated enough to level this entire block. The man you called a stray is the only person who can stop it. And you, in your infinite wisdom, decided he was a criminal because you didn't like his hoodie." The silence that followed was absolute. The entire nearby police force was watching, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning horror. Davies looked as if he'd been turned to stone. He was no longer a cop asserting authority. He was a fool, exposed under the hot glare of his own catastrophic misjudgment. "Get out of my sight," Rostova snarled. "Report to the command post and hand over your sidearm. You are on suspension, effective immediately. Henderson, you too. You stood there and let this happen." Henderson winced but nodded, his face grim. Davies, utterly broken, gave Marcus one last, pleading look, but Marcus's attention was already elsewhere. He was looking at the bank. The sideshow was over. "Captain," Marcus said, his voice pulling Rostova's focus back to the real problem. "The report mentioned a pressure plate trigger system with a secondary chemical component. Is that confirmed?" Rostova nodded, her professionalism snapping back into place. "Confirmed. And a motion sensor near the entrance. It's a nasty piece of work, Marcus." "It always is," he said. He looked past her toward the EOD truck that had just pulled up. "Let's get to work." He walked through the yellow tape that had blocked his path, Captain Rostova at his side. He didn't look back at Davies. He didn't need to. The man had already ceased to exist in his world. As he walked, a path cleared before him. The officers who had been watching him with suspicion now looked at him with a mixture of awe and terror. He was no longer a man in a hoodie. He was their only hope. The transformation was absolute. One moment, Marcus was a civilian, a target of suspicion. The next, he was the center of the universe. He reached the back of the heavy EOD truck, and his two-person support team, a young technician named Chen and a seasoned veteran named Riggs, met him with grim-faced efficiency. "Boss," Riggs said, handing him a tablet with a digital schematic of the bank's interior. They weren't kidding. "It's a layered device. Looks like our friend has been studying." Marcus's eyes scanned the screen, his mind absorbing the data, processing the variables. The noise of the city, the flashing lights, the tension, it all faded away into a muffled hum. His world shrank to the problem in front of him. This was where he lived. In the quiet, hyper-focused space between a breath and an explosion. He began to strip off his civilian clothes. The gray hoodie was tossed onto a bench. Underneath, he wore a simple black t-shirt. He was lean but powerfully built, his arms corded with the kind of muscle that comes from discipline, not vanity. He began the ritual of putting on the bomb suit. It was a slow, deliberate process, each piece a layer of protection but also a layer of isolation. The heavy trousers, the thick, armored torso, the gloves. Each click and seal was a step further away from the world of ignorant cops and suspicious glances, and a step deeper into his own element. Captain Rostova stood nearby, watching him. She held out a small, worn photograph. "We found this taped to the device, Marcus." He took it. It was a picture of a smiling family, a man, a woman, two small children. "The bank manager's family," Rostova said, her voice tight. "The bomber wants him to watch." Marcus stared at the photo. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. This wasn't just about mechanics anymore. It was personal. He handed the photo back and reached for the helmet. It was the last piece. A heavy, domed helmet with a thick visor, a piece of equipment that looked like it belonged on a mission to Mars. As Chen and Riggs sealed the helmet to the suit, the world outside became a distant, silent film. He could hear only the sound of his own breathing, amplified and steady, and the voice of Riggs in his earpiece. "Comms check, Lieutenant." Loud and clear, Marcus's voice came back, filtered, metallic, and utterly calm. He was no longer Marcus Cole, the man in the hoodie. He was EOD-1. He was the surgeon. He took a final look at the tablet, memorizing the layout, then turned toward the silent, waiting bank. As he began his walk, the long, lonely walk toward the entrance, he passed Officer Davies, who was standing near the command post, looking lost and small. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second through the thick visor. Marcus couldn't see the details of Davies's face, only a pale blur of shame. But Davies could see him. He saw the hulking, armored figure, a modern-day knight walking toward a dragon. The man he had pushed, the man he had threatened, the man he had judged as worthless, was now walking into the heart of the danger to save them all. It was a form of justice more profound and humiliating than any suspension could ever be. Marcus didn't give him a second thought. He had a job to do. The clock was ticking. The world inside the helmet was a universe of one. The only sounds were the hiss of his own regulated breath and the calm, steady voice of Riggs in his ear, feeding him information from the command post. The lobby of the First National Bank was eerily silent, a grand cathedral of commerce frozen in a moment of terror. The emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows across the marble floor, and there it was. Sitting on the central reception desk, looking deceptively simple, a metal box about the size of a shoebox with a web of multicolored wires leading to a digital display. The numbers on the display were red and stark, 7 minutes and 42 seconds. "I have eyes on the device," Marcus said into his mic, his voice a flat line. "Confirming pressure plate and motion sensor." "Confirmed, Lieutenant," came Riggs's voice. "The plate is under the box. Motion sensor has a 3-foot radius." Marcus moved with an economy of motion that was almost beautiful. Every step was precise, every movement calculated. He approached the desk from the side, staying low, avoiding the invisible tripwire of the motion sensor. He knelt, his bulky suit making the movement awkward but his core strength making it steady. He opened his toolkit, the instruments laid out on a black cloth with surgical precision. This was his art. Not the adrenaline-fueled heroics of movies, but a slow, painstaking process of intellectual and physical discipline. It was a conversation with another mind, the mind of the bomber. Every wire, every connection was a word in a deadly sentence. His job was to unwrite it before it reached its final, catastrophic punctuation mark. "I'm going to bypass the motion sensor first," he said. He selected a pair of fine, tipped probes, his gloved fingers moving with surprising dexterity. Outside, the command post was a knot of tense silence. Rostova, Davies, and a dozen other officers watched a grainy live feed from Marcus's helmet cam. They saw what he saw, the terrifying intimacy of the wires, the relentless countdown. Davies watched, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. He felt sick. The man on that screen, the steady hand moving with such impossible calm, was the man he had called astray. Back in the lobby, Marcus worked. 5 minutes and 12 seconds motion sensor bypassed, he reported. Now for the pressure plate. This is the delicate part. He had to lift the box just enough to slide a disarming tool underneath without releasing the pressure entirely. A millimeter too high and the circuit would complete. His breath was the only rhythm in the silent room. He exhaled slowly, his hands moving in perfect synchrony, lifting, sliding. 3 minutes, 27 seconds plate is secured, he said. A collective, unheard sigh of relief went through the command post. Now, Marcus murmured, more to himself than to his team, let's see what you've really built. He began to analyze the wiring. It was a mess, a deliberate attempt to confuse and mislead. Red herrings, decoy wires. But Marcus saw the pattern. He saw the bomber's signature, the subtle tells in the way the circuits were constructed. 1 minute 59 seconds. It's a cascading trigger, he said. Classic misdirection. He wants me to cut the red wire. The power source is actually routed through the green. Are you sure, Marcus? Rostova's voice cut in over the comms, tight with worry. I'm sure, he said. He picked up his wire cutters. The tool looked small and insignificant against the complex web of wires. He positioned the cutters on the green wire. His entire world narrowed to that single point, the steel jaws against the thin plastic sheath. 24 seconds. He took a breath. 23 seconds, and he cut. The red numbers on the digital display froze. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then the display flickered and went dark. Silence. Device is neutralized, Marcus said, his voice as calm as if he were announcing his lunch order. The cheer from the command post was an explosion of its own, a raw, primal roar of relief that he could just barely hear through his helmet. He knelt there for a moment longer, his gloved hand resting on the inert box. He had won. They were safe. He stood up, the heavy suit feeling a little lighter now. He turned and began the long walk back out of the bank, back into the world of noise and flashing lights. When he emerged, the crowd erupted. He ignored it. He walked straight to the EOD truck, where Riggs and Chen helped him out of the suit, piece by heavy piece. When the helmet came off, he took a deep breath of the cold, wet night air. It had never tasted so sweet. Captain Rostova was the first to reach him. She didn't say anything. She just put a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of profound gratitude and respect that was worth more than any medal. Then he saw Davies. The disgraced officer was standing off to the side, looking utterly defeated. He walked over to Marcus, his movements stiff and hesitant. "Lieutenant," he began, his voice cracking, I don't know what to say." Marcus looked at him, his face impassive. He was too tired for anger, too drained for lectures. He just nodded once. "You don't have to say anything, officer. Your actions spoke for you." He turned to walk away, but stopped. He looked back at Davies, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. "Next time you see a man in a hoodie," Marcus said, his voice quiet but carrying across the now silent scene, "try to remember that you have no idea what's underneath it. Sometimes it's just a man, and sometimes it's the only thing standing between you and the end of the world." He walked away, leaving Davies alone with the truth. Expertise has no dress code. Courage has no color. And sometimes the person you push aside is the only one who can save you.